Hello, welcome to Bring It Home, the podcast where we talk about America's industrial renaissance. At Bring It Home, we feature the topics that people care about when it comes to manufacturing and domestic supply chains. JP is my co-host, and each week we dive into topics that are relevant to American manufacturing, the challenges, the opportunities that exist in bringing manufacturing back home. JP, a lot of conversation post-election about tariffs, about Donald Trump's desire to bring manufacturing back to the United States. A lot of problems have also been discussed, or challenges with this. We're going to dive into that. Molson, who is, I think, prolific on X, has a lot of opinions about what it's going to take. But one of the interesting things is he's actually bringing American manufacturing. He's in the toy business.
Yes.
And he's going to do stuffed animals.
Yeah, so this is Mike Molson Hart. You'll know him on X. He sort of sits at the intersection of toys, e-commerce, trans-Pacific supply chains, and he's
got a lot of opinion.
He's got a lot of opinion.
I mean, he inserts a lot of opinion into a lot of topics, like most people in X, I do as well.
Yeah.
But an area that he is incredibly thoughtful on is the challenges in e-commerce, but specifically American manufacturing. And he was what's interesting about Molson is a year ago, he was very anti any kind of manufacturing in the U.S., and he's flipped. And one thing I love about him is he sort of owns the fact that he changed his opinion.
Yeah.
We're going to hear from him about why he's changed his opinion, what he's planning on doing. He's got a unique approach, and I'm excited to hear what he has to say.
For sure. We've also got some headlines to talk about in this episode. So speaking of tariffs in the incoming administration, the Biden administration is also kind of putting media out there and putting comms out there to try to define its legacy, right, as it kind of goes out the door. And they released some economic data saying that what they call the Investing in America agenda, which is sort of their trio of big spending bills, the Infrastructure Bill, the CHIPS Act, the Inflation Reduction Act. Those three have catalyzed what they say is $1 trillion in private investment since 2021, when that administration came in. Big sort of report from their Council of Economic Advisors came out about this. Pretty interesting. There's some maps that we'll include in this episode that show where all these investments have been made and sort of where what segments of manufacturing they're in. As you would expect, a lot of it's like clean power, battery type stuff, semiconductors, solar, things of that nature.
Yeah, I mean, look, I think the Biden administration's track record on manufacturing investment infrastructure is actually driving results. And you can see this in the amount of dollars that we've seen poured into manufacturing. The big question, and I think this is the difference between sort of Trump's orientation versus Biden's orientation, is Biden is a sort of a top-down, the government is going to lead the process for driving industrialization. Donald Trump's process is quite different, which is we're going to have businesses create an environment where it's favorable for businesses. Things like tariffs, tax cuts, changing the tax code to allow accelerated depreciation, investment in opportunity zones, those types of things. It's a very different approach. They both have both pluses and minuses. The plus, when you get into sort of Biden's sort of top-down process, is you get a lot of money flowing into the economy. The challenge is that government isn't efficient at delivering that money.
And it takes forever. There's lots of strings attached. You're picking winners and losers.
We've talked about this before, is the CHIPS Act. One of the complaints that the Intel CEO made about the CHIPS Act is that hasn't received the majority or the vast majority of the money that was actually allocated to
They
Intel.
just now finalized what they're going to award Intel. And this came out like a few days ago.
And it's 2.5 years after this act passed. And so when you think about how long it's taken, the electric charging stations that was supposed to be there from an infrastructure standpoint, I think there have been 9, billions of dollars were invested in electric charging. Internet for everyone, essentially plugging everyone into high-speed broadband hasn't happened. And it's because government is really, really inefficient at doing these things. Donald Trump's approach is to have it bottoms up. We're seeing people like Molson's business. I mean, imagine, as we'll hear from Molson, it's a toy manufacturer. It's not Mattel. It's not Hasbro. It's a small boy, very specialized into plush toys and brain flakes, which is a sort of a plastic toy thing. Imagine if you get 1,000 Molsons making those decisions. And I think this is where it starts, and this is something that's quite different. Again, I think Biden's administration was, I want these big projects, big splashy projects, EVs. We want to decarbonize the United States, but we want to reignite automotive. I think it has merit because it does that. What you also get is things are slow and bureaucratic. And as we've seen with electric vehicles, is you end up encouraging manufacturers to build things that consumers may not want.
Yes.
And that is a big challenge with the automotive sector. Whereas Trump's policies are actually different. They take longer, and they're somewhat unpredictable. Part of his strategy in negotiation.
But it's kind of about changing the rules of the game instead of just going in one by one and picking companies that you're going to direct lend to.
Or industries. And I think one of the challenges is how consistent, because businesses take a while to make. When you're making private investments, you want absolute certainty that the taxes are going to stay a certain way or tariffs are going to stay a certain way. The challenge we have currently is we don't have an understanding long-term of what our tariff policy look like or industrial policy looks like. We have certainty that there's going to be tax reductions. But we don't know exactly what that's going to mean. And so these are different challenges. But I would say all created equal, a bottoms-up approach is more sustainable. And you get a more vibrant economy long term,
and hopefully more responsive to consumers and organic demand.
And it creates a more sustainable sort of infrastructure with a lot less waste because the private sector is able to sort of respond to the inputs and not the public sector.
And to get into a little bit to a specific example of this, there's another announcement that speaks directly to this, which is that Rivian. The electric vehicle manufacturer, they make SUVs and trucks that people drive, and you've seen them on the highways. They recently received a $6.6 billion loan from the Department of Energy that it's going to allow them to complete this production facility in Georgia that they've been trying to build for a number of years. They had to pause it earlier this year when they ran into a couple tough quarters and weren't seeing the demand that they thought would support those additional production lines. And so it's kind of an interesting story because it's they had a lot of momentum. They kind of overbuilt a little bit, saw soft demand, but now they're getting another fresh round of government credit essentially to sort of double down on this big plant and hope that the demand picks up or that they can sell these cars, right? But it's a specific example of sort of the Biden administration strategy and what they've tried to do with a lot of these industries.
I mean, the auto sector has benefited tremendously from Biden's programs. Whether it's electrification, the money that's gone into that, just the incentive structure has benefited the automotive sector more so than anything. The question is, how long-term do they reap those benefits? Because if you've changed your supply chain to be fully electric or orientated towards fully electric, what happens if the consumers are not buying the vehicles? And we've talked a lot about some of the challenges on why consumers may or may not want these vehicles. It's going to be interesting to watch as we sort of move beyond the subsidy phase of reindustrialization to sort of the long-term sustainable phase, how much of this sort of is resilient?
Yeah, it will be. And speaking to the sort of recovery in manufacturing and the sustainability of these investments and booms. The manufacturing PMI improved in November over October, so it went up to 48.8, which is technically still in like slight contraction. But the big call out from that survey was that manufacturing sentiment is now the highest it's been in 31 months. So almost the entirety of the last administration. Now manufacturers are excited about the future. They're optimistic. They're investing, and they're starting to see demand pick up.
I think something that is hard for an economist to understand is the animal spirits of business. I've seen since the election a lot of business owners become incredibly optimistic about, whether they're manufacturing or retail, just more optimistic about the direction of where we're headed. Things like regulatory burden that is put on businesses, particularly if you want to expand your manufacturing plant, is taxing. And so I think there is a lot of renewed optimism. That optimism actually can carry a lot of, because businesses start making investments in the future, start hiring more employees. Those things actually do pay off and do matter. And so it will be interesting to watch. And that I think will respond faster, has faster inputs than even policy does in terms of short term. The question is, does policy then follow along to really?
Right. Hopefully, the policy delivers on people's expectations.
Yeah, 100%.
Cool. Well, that's it for the news of the week. Now we can go to Molson Hart, right?
So our guest is Molson. He runs Tiger Heart and Brain Flakes, and he's here to talk about what manufacturing looks like for him, why he's bringing it back to America, and what his thoughts are on really improving and encouraging manufacturing investments. One of the things that I think Molson really believes is that this is not just about cost savings and not just about tariffs. In order to have a sustainable manufacturing sector in the United States, we need real structural reform. He's going to talk a lot about that. I'm excited to hear what he has to say. So Molson, I'd love to get into how you started this business, a little bit of background for our audience on what exactly it is that you guys do.
Yeah, so we design primarily educational toys, and then we send them to factories in Asia, China, Indonesia, Vietnam. We have them manufactured in Asia. We oversee the manufacturing to ensure that the quality is good. Then we bring it over, mostly in containers, to the United States, to this warehouse that's behind me. We store it for a little while, and then we ship it to customers. That's basically how our business works.
So one of the conversations that has been happening is, Donald Trump has made a big point of bringing back manufacturing for the United States. Toys has been one of those industries that frankly got outsourced very early in the globalization cycle because as you mentioned, it's discretionary. Consumers really react to price significantly when it's the toy market. You decided to actually take a leap and move manufacturing back to the US, or at least planning to do that. Tell us a little bit what drove that conversation.
Yeah, so if you've ever been to like a Build-A-Bear workshop, you can take a skin at one of these kind of like toy stores that are in malls. You can pick a skin and you can attach it to a machine. And the machine will fill that skin up with plush, and then it gets sewed closed. So we have decided to import machinery from China that will allow us to fill skins from Asia in the United States. And that will do basically two things. The first thing it will do is it will save us money on shipping costs. So some of our plush animals are really big, and many of the boxes behind me are full of plush animals, and it's quite large. And if you can import those items as skins instead of filled plush animals, you save a lot of money on container shipping. The second idea behind this is that it's currently toys have a 0% duty. So when we import them, there's no duty and there's no tariff. It's possible that under a Trump presidency, there will be a duty and there will be a tariff. And should that occur, we would be well positioned with our machines that allow us to fill animals in the United States. And then the third thing is I just think it's like badass and cool.
Is it because the skins tend to be cheaper when you import, like the raw materials cheaper than say the plush fully inflated or fully built stuffed animal?
No, it's because you save money on shipping. That's the main reason why some companies have these plush filling machines. It's the same idea, actually. It's used also for like pillows and stuff like that. A lot of pillows are filled in the United States as well. But if Trump puts it all depends on how the administration ends up putting these duties on products. If they put it only on China, that's one situation. If they put it on China and Indonesia, where we also import a lot of plush animals, that's a different situation. And depending on how these tariffs or duties are put on toys, having machines in the United States can be really positive or just like a small, slight positive.
How did you get into the toy business? I know that you did brain flakes. What was the sort of impetus for that?
So I was working I was a math and economics double major in college. And I'm from a part of the country where everyone does finance. I'm from like the Northeast. And I got a job at a consulting firm, actually for minimum wage, because I graduated in like 2009 and there were like no jobs, even if you were like a good candidate. I mean, I wasn't a great candidate, but so I had a minimum wage job in Connecticut, and I got fired from that job for being mischievous, but also for telling them like, hey, I figured out how to automate this stuff. Just give me the work that I can automate. Don't give me the work that I can't automate. And so I ended up getting fired. And it was at that moment I was like, man, I was an ambitious kid, but I figured out that I was never going to thrive in a corporate environment. And so I was like, okay, well, I have to be an entrepreneur. And unfortunately, the first idea I had was for a toy. And I asked the richest person I knew, I was like, hey, how do I make toys? He's like, go to China. The Chinese like face to face. So against my mother's protests, I booked a flight to China. And she was like, they're going to cut your organs out of you. And I was like, I don't care. I just got to do this. And so I ended up in like a random part of China, actually on the border with North Korea, just like completely helpless, not speaking Chinese at all, just learning how manufacturing worked.
Did you know where you were headed before you got on the plane? Had you done some research to figure out what part of China to go to?
Yeah, I had found a factory. And unfortunately, that first factory I found was in like the wrong part of China. Like I wasn't in Shenzhen, or I wasn't in like a civilized part of China. I was in like a tier 3 city, literally like a kilometer from North Korea. And I knew where I was going, but I didn't know what was going to find me when I got there. And I just like learned a lot of like hard, painful lessons. And about like 3 or 4 years later, I ended up getting shaken down by corrupt cops in that town and like having to flee the country. And so I had a lot of like painful experiences in China, which were at the time painful, but looking back were like absolutely fantastic because it really taught me about like how the world works, and you gain a lot of experience and confidence from overcoming adversity.
Molson, I'm fascinated by your China experiences, and I've loved like reading about you narrating them on Twitter, especially as they happen. I would like to hear just more about like what you think the Chinese do right in terms of manufacturing, what you think they do wrong, and kind of like why, what the play is for e-commerce companies that may want to bring production, back to the U.S.
Okay, so what do they do right? A lot. So Chinese workers, if you ask Asian factory bosses or people who've had factories all over the world, Chinese workers are famous for having the highest labor efficiency of any worker of any country in the world. Okay, so people work hard, they work fast, they'll happily put in 70, 80 hours a week. Okay, so that's really important. Another thing is that people in China generally have like pretty strong math skills, which are pretty key for manufacturing. So I guess like part of Chinese culture, I suppose you could say, is working hard. But something that China does pretty well is educating their people, especially when it comes to math. And so people graduate from schools and they work in the factories, or they work in the management of the factories, and they have like pretty good skills. And those things are quite helpful. Chinese infrastructure is fantastic. They run their ports better and faster than we do. They have good airports. I think our freight rail might still be better than theirs. They've got really good, they got a good barge system, so they're moving things on the water. I know Craig was talking about that a little bit and how we need to get that going in the United States. Other things they do right, I think that they do their government subsidies in like a pretty intelligent way. Those are some of the things they do well.
So, Molson, why would you, other than the tariffs, is there a reason to move manufacturing back to the U.S. or?
Well, in terms of the plush filling, we actually stand to save money by importing skins of large plush animals. Instead of importing the large plush animal, we can just fit more products in the container, which costs the same. And so one of our larger items, I should probably grab one or something like that. Like if you have like a giant tiger or something like that, the landed cost goes from, let's say, $25, depending on what the container price is, down to $20 or $18. And that either drops to our bottom line as profit, or it allows us to sell the product for less, which allows us to sell more. And then, that has other benefits.
Yeah, as we say in the business, you're hauling air. If you're just, air doesn't pay very well, and that's essentially what you're doing. I think it was a year ago, you actually took a video where you went back to China and sort of had this experience that you, at least as you described it on Twitter or on X, it may have actually been TikTok that you did the original video on, was just how surprised you were and how different things were this trip than prior trips.
I'm going to tell you the 7 major ways that China has changed in the past 5 years. I've been coming here on and off for 10 years and maybe a little bit more than that, and I have a lot of stories. I'll weave those stories into how the country has changed pre-COVID versus COVID.
You got a lot of attention from it. Actually, at one point, people accused you of being a spy for the CCP.
Yeah.
What was that like? What was the experience like? What really motivated you to talk about your experience in China?
Yeah, so it's interesting. I would say I try to be objective, and I try to be fair. People will probably view that video as pro-China. What was interesting is I posted it on X and I posted it on TikTok. It got shadow banned on TikTok, which we think of as the pro-China platform. It hit like 200,000 views and it was going like crazy. And you could see that people were watching it for a long time and had lots of comments. And then the views just stopped. Whereas on Twitter, it got like 7 or 8 million views. When I was in China, I was there for maybe like a week to 10 days. And like every day I was like, oh my God, I need to tell people about this. Oh my God, I need to tell people about this. This country has changed so much in 4 or 5 years. This is absolutely insane. I needed it. And so I just started taking notes. Like, wow, people are like less rude. Or like, wow, people don't drive crazy anymore. Or like, wow, the air is really good. Like, this is such a crazy change. And like, wow, technology is everywhere and it's like automated and efficient. People need to know what's going on. And so I had this just like weird organic like fire in my heart or belly, whatever you want to call it. And I just like had to make a video. And I happened to be in Shanghai and I just like cranked out like something like the 7 ways that China had changed between 2019 and 2024. And at the time, people didn't really know about that stuff because between 2019 and 2024, you had the pandemic and it was so hard to get to China and back and forth. And so I think it was like one of the first videos that came out post-pandemic that was like, yo, this country has changed a lot and people in the world need to be aware of that.
And what was the big takeaway? I mean, you had 7 things that had changed. Was there anything that really is sort of different from your personal experience than what you saw or what has been portrayed in the media for folks that have not gone back and visited China?
Yeah, so for most people, I think the thing that would, for people who've never been to China, the thing that would surprise you is that China has like a higher robot density in its manufacturing than the United States does by a pretty significant amount, despite having cheaper labor. And other things like there's no crime in China, or there is crime, of course, but it's like significantly less crime than there is on a per capita basis in the United States. And the infrastructure on balance is probably better than it is in the United States. But for me, what blew my mind most is that like people weren't like rude anymore, and that the air was clean, and like people were like more organized and civilized. That's really what blew my mind, because when you were in like tier 3 city China in like 2011, man, like it was a wild place. And it was like a lot of craziness going on, and it definitely became like a more civilized country. And that was the thing that really blew my mind. And I would say that it was driven by like government, and like they have got some good government policies. But the other thing that I think was driving it that was interesting is that they were doing like a lot of automation, right? So like imagine like a line, right? People in America are like pretty orderly when it comes to a line, and if you cut the line, someone's going to be like, hey, what the heck, man? Like, you cut the line, like go back to the line. Like, we follow line. We stand in line in America. In China, like that's not how things would work. People would just like bum rush something, and people would just like jump in front of each other, and they'd push and they'd step on each other's feet. But then like China introduced like a lot of automation in their train stations and stuff like that, where they'd like auto scan your face. And some of this stuff sounds dystopian, but like by making it very easy for the government to write you a ticket for breaking like a traffic law, okay, with like cameras and automation, they caused people to drive a lot better. And this kind of had this like weird spillover effect where everyone just became like more civilized and orderly in daily life. And that was the thing that really blew my mind, because it was different from how things used to be.
It's sort of the Rudy Giuliani policing of New York. It's like they going after the small petty crimes enables them to get much more order. I remember I visited Pudong, which is a part of Shanghai. It's sort of the high-end part of Shanghai. And I remember getting out of a taxi in 2004 and just being there were, it seemed like dozens of Chinese people just coming, grabbing at you, wanting to sell you something. When it was very chaotic and frankly pretty threatening to an American, to a white guy that's over there.
It's interesting that it sounds like a lot like what Molson is talking about is like this like COVID era social engineering kind of surveillance regime where they've been able to impose like new norms on people pretty quickly.
Molson, do you think this is a post-COVID thing that is sort of implemented, or is this something that was evolving over as the country was modernizing? And sort of generational elements that were sort of popping out. Do you think it was inevitable that it would end up this way, or was it actually triggered by COVID itself?
I don't think it was triggered by COVID. I think that people might think it was triggered by COVID because COVID kind of shut down the country to travel for a couple of years. And so you got to see that improvement or change, whatever you want to call it, in a big jump from 2019 to 2024, or whenever they opened up in 2023. I think that this was just like this was a long-term, incremental, gradual change that we perceived as a single jump because we couldn't visit the country. And I think that COVID probably didn't help it, because, there were people in Shanghai in particular, what drove them to open up the country is that people were like, hey, we're sick of this. We're sick of these like endless lockdowns. Like, you have to free up the country. And so people got pretty ornery in China, and that's what caused the government, it's my understanding. Sorry, I'm in a warehouse and there's a mosquito. That's what caused the government to loosen things up ultimately and just let COVID do its thing.
So while you were in e-commerce during COVID and after COVID, what did you learn about international e-commerce supply chains and their fragility or resilience? What did you learn about American infrastructure, Chinese infrastructure
in COVID?
Yeah, during your experience of like selling online during COVID.
I learned that our costs could like triple. I mean, like our containers were going for like $2,000 or $3,000, and then like I paid $25,000 to move a container from Indonesia to Houston, and I think we had to pay additional money to we couldn't even get it to go to Houston because there wasn't capacity there, and we sent it to Tacoma, Washington, and then we unloaded it there, and then we put it on trucks, and then we did a full truckload from Tacoma, Washington down to Texas. I remember being really frustrated with American ports, which weren't running 24/7. I think that they run 2 shifts or something like that, whereas all the Asian ports are not only more efficient, but they also run 24 hours a day. And these backlogs were frustrating because we would run out of stock. I learned about how powerful it is to have free money. and what that can do for your sales. I learned how you can make good money some years, 2020, 2021, to a lesser extent 2022. And now in 2024, man, like we're really not doing great, especially relative to the boom years of 2020 and 2021. So it's been very educational. And another thing is like we didn't restock our inventory until it was too late. Like in 2020, kind of like in March and April when schools started to shut down, like our sales went crazy. And I probably should have been like, well, let's start like ordering now instead of assuming that this was temporary. And I just didn't order early enough. And then by the time I did order, I ordered too much. So I guess you could say I learned about the inventory bullwhip, how you get these big spikes in demand and then like these kind of troughs because you have too much supply, and it can just go on and on like this. And it feels like we've just been in a continuous bullwhip since March 2020.
So Molson, what does manufacturing in the U.S. look like? Let's talk, a lot of conversation about bringing manufacturing back. There's been a lot of folks that said, hey, it's not going to happen because of the cost, because of the regulatory environment, lack of infrastructure, lack of automation. You're betting on America. Obviously, you see something other than just cost that's driving this. What does this look like for you? And what do you expect to happen?
I'm expecting to lose money for a little while because of my over optimism, and because whenever you start something new, we're effectively building like a small factory. You tend to lose money at the beginning, and then over time you figure things out. I don't really know what it's going to look like. I wish that we got some incentives from the government in terms of like property taxes and stuff like that. But so far, the local government hasn't provided us with any of those. I mean, I'm a little bit concerned about it, but it's also something that just like seems exciting, and it's something that we need to try. What does manufacturing look like in the United States? I mean, like tariffs are enormously helpful. Restrictions on what can be purchased. For example, like, a lot of guns are made in America, I think, because, don't quote me on this, but they can't be imported. Tariffs drive a lot of the manufacturing in cars, for example. Things that are really big, they either can't fit in the container or, as you said, have a lot of air in them. Those are going to be manufactured in America, whether it's plush animals or like a giant tank that needs to be used for the storage of some sort of liquid. Things that use our raw materials. We have pretty cheap plastic in the United States, and we've got good refinery capacity, and we're really good at that stuff. And we actually export a lot of it to Asia. So whether it's like soybeans and food, which we kick ass at, or, plastics, which is based on our like local raw material oil. That's also really helpful when it comes to U.S. manufacturing. But I also understand there are a lot of obstacles too. Reserve currency, is a big one. I'm not sure people want to work in manufacturing. Health is another one. The way that we've structured healthcare in the United States is an enormous problem. Obesity in our country is also an obstacle to manufacturing. So a lot of problems.
Do you think the desire of the Trump administration, or just desire of Americans to move manufacturing back, is going to be enough? Or do you think there's some structural things that we have to change to really sort of ignite manufacturing back in the U.S.?
Yeah, the desire is clearly insufficient. You cannot just have a new administration come in, pull a lever, and oh wow, now we're manufacturing. Another reason that we don't have manufacturing in the United States is we kind of have a brain drain towards software and finance. Okay, you have to really love manufacturing to do it in the United States, because you can oftentimes, if you can get a job in finance, that will pay better. Yeah, desire is insufficient. We need to make long-term, gradual, structural changes in order to bring back manufacturing in this country. And then we also need to improve our infrastructure, which also takes some time. And the way that Trump did the tariffs in the first year, that doesn't bring manufacturing back. If you just put tariffs on China, that just moves manufacturing from China to other countries, whether it's Mexico or other countries in Southeast Asia. So it needs to be done in a thoughtful, considerate, gradual way, and there needs to be certainty. You can't be like, okay, now we're putting a 25% tariff on this country. Oh no, it's all countries. Oh, and now that 25% is now down to 10%. Oh, now we don't have a tariff. Like, you can't just do that, because people need certainty in order to plan. You're not going to build a factory if you think that that tariff is going to disappear next year. And so I think people are being a little bit overly optimistic about how easy it is to just be like transform our entire like nation and our economy.
It's a little haphazard. I mean, we've seen, recent conversations and threats about we're putting them on Mexico and Canada to float, to cut off fentanyl trafficking. But it's uncertain about whether that's sustainable or whether Mexico or Canada are going to put concessions to actually resolve it. So, to your point, it doesn't feel like a strategy. It feels like a negotiation tactic versus a long-term sort of plan. I think that's the biggest concern, is like, because businesses need certainty, investors need a capital certainty and return certainty, and it feels like that is not being a part of the conversation.
Yeah, I agree with you completely. I mean, my friend sent me a text saying, like, look at what Trump is doing. He's going to destroy the economy. Look at what he just said about Mexican tariffs. And I was like, dude, it's like an opening negotiation position. But to your point, like, these opening negotiation positions aren't so helpful to business owners who are trying to figure out whether or not they should invest in U.S. manufacturing. There needs to be some certainty there.
Yeah. For sure.
And it's interesting that you're saying that the policy conversation kind of has to get beyond stage one of trade and really think about making, not just, making a country, say China, less attractive, but making the United States more attractive, in itself.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, like, healthcare needs to be solved. Obesity, it would really help. Like, if you have people who are like morbidly obese, it's like difficult for them to do manufacturing because they need to be able to move their bodies, lift things, they need to be agile, and they need to be healthy, and they need to have energy. Like, you can't, as I said before, like, China has higher robot density than the United States. So we're not just going to be able to, and all these robots are mostly made in China, and it's easier for them to repair the robots. And so automation is not just something that we're going to be able to just do. And so we also have to improve education. It's not just as simple as like slapping some tariffs on some stuff and then being like, oh, boom, we're done. Especially when you don't know if there's going to be continuity in those policies when it comes to the new administration.
Yeah, Molson, you make an interesting point about education. A lot has been talked about people going to college. Bernie Sanders years ago talked about every kid should have the dream of going to college. Trade schools were largely left out of that conversation. There has been a lot of emphasis on university education, go four-year college. There doesn't seem to be an emphasis on trade schools. Tennessee, actually, giving a shout out to our state, actually has created a lot of investment in trade schools and community colleges for the reason that these jobs are necessary. But at a national level, everything is about a four-year degree, to your point, doesn't actually help someone that's going to be in an assembly line, whether it's building cars, building, manufacturing toys, or running supply chains.
Oh, I agree completely. It's my understanding. I don't know how China does it. I don't know if they just like do apprenticeships or they just like plug you into Foxconn when you're 16, 17 or 18 years old and you just kind of learn how things work. But it's my understanding that trade schools are essential in a country like Germany, which used to be which was a manufacturing powerhouse and is now seeing some tough times, perhaps after the blow up of the Nord Stream pipeline and now with electric vehicles kind of overtaking their local domestic car industry in some ways. Yeah, we subsidize college, right? Like, so we guarantee this student debt, and then we don't check and make sure that these kids, like when I was 18, I had no idea what I was signing up for when I like agreed to take on this debt. It was just my parents just came in, they just like brought me some papers. They're like, hey, sign this if you want to like go to college. And I'm like, okay. And I didn't know I was signing up for all that debt. And I think that I think of myself as a smart person. And so a lot of people have just no idea what they're doing. And they don't realize that if they're getting a degree in women and gender studies or some other weird sociology thing that's never going to pay, they're saddling themselves with an enormous amount of debt. And what they really should be doing is like going directly into the workforce or going to a trade school and like learning how to weld and stuff like that, and something that'll actually pay them faster, more money, and they're not going to get saddled with all this debt. So I think that the college situation with the student debt, that's another one that all needs to be fixed in order for us to really get this manufacturing thing going. And one of the reasons why it's so important is that like manufacturing, like really, it like takes the whole labor force. Like guys who are like good mechanically and spatially, they can like get work done in a world where they will be well compensated in an economy that has manufacturing. But if we're just like a pure finance and media economy, there's not really a place for those people. And it's important militarily that we have like a strong manufacturing economy, because if you don't have a strong manufacturing economy, you can't supply military, and so you can't defend your country. And so there are all these like really good reasons why we need to bring manufacturing back into the country. And but there are all these problems that we need to solve, and student debt and subsidizing college degrees that don't pay is one of the problems that we need to address.
Yeah, it's really blown up the university system. That whole bureaucracy that is academia benefits greatly from the explosion of student debt. And, you know, my son is 18. He's touring colleges and figuring out where he wants to go. And what's interesting visiting colleges, they're trying to sell the student because the money's locked in. He's either going to get it from the parents or he's going to get it from the government or some type of student loan structure. They just have to convince the student it's butts and seats is ultimately what drives their budgets. And that's what they care about far more than actually delivering a return on investment. It's the student life experience that is the driver of revenue for these schools. It's not the results.
Right. The money's guaranteed. So regardless of whether or not that, I mean, this is not going to happen with your son, but regardless of whether or not someone who gets like a degree in something that doesn't pay, regardless of whether or not they're able to pay their debt, the school gets their money.
Yeah.
And so there's not necessarily an incentive for them to deliver the education they need.
I mean, I told him if it were me, I'd go to finance because that's where the money's at. I mean, I'm being a bit of a hypocrite here because I'm like, if you're advising your kids, just like, look, there's always opportunity in finance. It's a pretty universally transferable degree, but I'm not actually I'm part of the problem by doing that. But that's the reality. Our economy is built where money and finance is an opportunity for kids. And that's, frankly, as a father, you're thinking about those things.
Molson, let's talk a little bit about your workforce. You know, you've got operations in Austin, Texas, which, you know, I tend to think of as getting to be a pretty crowded, expensive city. You're developing like, you know, this labor force that's in, you know, distribution, logistics, fulfillment, and now manufacturing. How are you finding these people, training them, retaining them? What are you looking for out of, you know, a great employee for your operations?
So they're great, and I'm not just saying that because they're behind me.
They have forklifts. They can easily take you out.
We have a full-time team that operates this warehouse with 3 people, and they are great. And so what am I looking for? I'm looking for someone who's stable, who's smart, who wants to learn new skills, and is interested in what we do. We have 2 additional people in here today, and we have temps. And because we actually, before I did this podcast, we unloaded 35,000 pounds of Brain Flakes, which is a building toy that we sell, and we need temps. And so that's another temp behind me, actually. And so basically the way that we structure our business is that we have a full-time team who's always there. And then whenever we have a spike, whether it's Black Friday or unloading a container, we bring in temps. And I mean, look, this is what I do. I'm not thinking I'm an expert, but for me personally, I like to have few people who are really great. And so, I mean, like the test is you ask the people who are behind me whether or not I'm doing this, right? Because I could just be BSing, but I pay more than the companies around me. We're paying more than Tesla. We're paying significantly more than the Amazon fulfillment center, you know, down the road. But we're getting higher quality people who do better jobs, who are more committed, and there's less turnover. And then we just plug things in when we need it with the temps who are just roaming around aimlessly. behind me.
Also, do you think that we're going to see more toy manufacturers move production back to the U.S.? Or is this something that's unique to your business because of the types of products that you're offering?
This is unique to my business, and it's unique to me because I'm a little bit insane and I'm like a glutton for punishment. The toy industry is actually basically it's contracting. It's getting smaller, and there are two reasons for that. So basically, in the short term, we have a major problem in terms of consumer discretionary demand. Okay, that's down, and so you're going to see a lot of toy businesses struggle. So that's the first thing. The second thing is that there were 4 million more children between the ages 0 to 9 in 2013 than there were in 2023. And the births continue to decline. So the demand for what the toy industry makes in the United States is shrinking every year. And so the toy industry is having a lot of problems. And if you're having a lot of problems, now is not necessarily the best time to invest in manufacturing, especially when we don't even have any tariffs or duties on toys. And we don't even have a local toy industry to protect, right? So it makes sense to throw duties and tariffs on the industry that we already have in the United States to restrict kind of competition in a way, or to allow them to get better, depending on how you view it. But all the toy manufacturers in the United States have already left, so we don't have that. So it'll probably be just us, and it's probably something that's a little bit unique and specific to the way that I think, and also to the cost savings associated with filling plush animals in the United States.
Molson, so where can folks buy their toys? Would this be released right before the holidays? Where's the best location for them to pick up their toys?
The best location, if you want to save money, is on our brand websites. So one of our brands is Brain Flakes. And so you go to brainflakes.com and you're going to save money there versus Amazon. The more you buy, the more you're going to save. TigerHeartToys.com, same thing. You're going to save money versus Amazon. And the way that we're able to do that is that our costs for a lot of products are actually lower than Amazon's, believe it or not. And then also Amazon just charges these really hefty fees compared to our website, which our websites don't have. And so we just pass some of those savings to the consumer. So one of the reasons that I didn't mention why our business is not doing well is that Amazon just really cranked up their fees this year very hard. So it's a very difficult situation where demand is down and costs are up a lot. And it's not like we can get off Amazon. Well, Amazon accounts for like roughly 80% of our sales.
It reminds me of, do you remember the movie The Toy? With Richard Pryor, and they had these giant stuffed animals as part of it.
No, I haven't seen that.
Yeah, well, it's a good movie. It's a classic.
Interesting.
Molson, really appreciate your time. I'm going to have to get to my Christmas shopping on your site. So really enjoy. Best of luck as you build out your manufacturing. I know that's a big, hefty undertaking, and appreciate you doing it and sharing the story with us today.
Thank you, Craig. I appreciate it.
We'll talk soon. We'll see you out on X.
Okay. Later.
Thanks, Molson.
You guys.
See you, Molson.
See ya.
So it's a fun conversation. I mean, Molson's got a view. He's been very public about his what he saw in China. That was really, I think, one of the breakouts. He's been on X for many years talking about all of the major issues that exist in the U.S. And really providing some, especially as a business owner, one that's in a category that's frankly quite competitive, but also quite discretionary.
Yeah, and I just love the intersection of e-commerce, international logistics, manufacturing. They can all kind of
education. He brought an interesting point that we haven't talked about a lot was education. The need to make manufacturing cool, because I think that is part of the primary reason that people don't consider it. I mean, what's interesting is
running these CNC, these computer numerical controlled machines, knowing how to set up assembly lines, like Molson said, sort of having this spatial visualization to put all that together. It's not simple or easy or
no. There's a lot of money
for dumb people.
I know people who a friend of mine has an automated robotics business that goes into auto manufacturers. In Tesla, they're in Volkswagen, they're in others. That business is very lucrative for them. I mean, there's some of their techs are making $150,000, $200,000 a year managing these robotic automation machines and coming in and doing maintenance, preventive maintenance, or actually repairing them when they break down. They make a lot of money. And it's because they are very specialized on a select skill set that is pretty unique. And I think that's an area. But I think the education thing is something we should probably talk about more, is just how important education and changing the perception of manufacturing and supply chain as coursework for kids. And look, not going to a 4-year degree school, going to a trade school is actually a really right
Or just at least
option.
not making it the sort of universal aspiration.
Correct. It's like you must go to college, and that's not true. It was an interesting article that came out, is that black colleges, a lot of sort of mainstream traditional colleges are actually struggling right now because it's just, there's such an arms race for students. Whereas the traditional black colleges are actually doing quite well. It's because they've sort of tapped into that population that would, Black Americans are now
more people
choosing
going
to college.
So it's still like a growth.
It's a growth opportunity for them, but it also goes back to what we talked about, is the whole education student loan element. Could be impactful to that population. Whereas there are fantastic jobs in traditional manufacturing.
Right.
Well, JP, it's been another great episode. Bring it home. This is the show to tune into if you're interested in the American manufacturing renaissance. We talk about all of the topics that are top of mind for bringing back manufacturing to the United States and really creating a fantastic industrial sector with Bring It Home.